Welcome to Her Time Unfolded, where we uncover the women history tried to erase. This episode, The Hidden Power, Life of a Philistine Noblewoman. Over 3,000 years ago, along the southern coast of the Mediterranean, 5 powerful cities stood like iron nails driven into the shoreline. Ashkelon, Gaza, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. From above, the coast looks quiet, almost harmless. But these were cities built to command the sea winds and the trade roads. Archaeology confirms it. Fortified walls, imported pottery, foreign goods, and the traces of busy streets. These were the cities of the Philistines. They were warriors, yes, men trained for shield and spear, standing watch at the gates. But they were also traders, bargaining in markets where Aegean vessels and Egyptian treasures changed hands. And they became masters of iron, shaping hard new weapons in smoky workshops, sparks flying as the metal took form. Yet behind the men of war and the kings, another kind of power moved quietly. If you want more hidden history like this, subscribe. Women lived in these cities whose influence rarely made it into the records, because history preferred the sound of battles to the silence of strategy. Today we explore the real history of the Philistines and a reconstructed story built from archaeology and evidence. A glimpse into what life might have been like for one noblewoman, watching from behind curtains in carved stone, learning the language of wealth, politics, and survival. We do not know her name, but we can still trace the shape of her world. Ashkelon was not just a city, it was a statement. Beneath layers of sand, archaeology reveals palace courtyards, storerooms, imported pottery, and temples that once drew people like gravity. And that evidence points to something clear. Powerful, noble families lived here, close to the heart of wealth and decision-making. So imagine a girl born into one of those households around 1150 BCE. Her childhood would be filled with the sounds of industry, looms clicking, jars being sealed, servants moving through stone corridors with practiced silence. She would learn how a household functioned like a small kingdom, where textiles became currency and storage rooms meant security. But noble daughters were shaped for more than domestic skill. She would be taught to observe trade, to recognize value, to understand how agreements were made, and who benefited when they were. Religion would also shape her education. Temples were not only sacred spaces, they were centers of influence, and the rituals performed there were tied to wealth, status, and legitimacy. And archaeology suggests Philistine women could hold authority over property and resources, including wealth connected to temples and estates. So her lessons would include the quiet weight of ownership, the power of a seal, the meaning of what was stored and what was given. And sometimes the most important lessons were not taught directly. We can picture her watching her father negotiate with merchants from Egypt and the Aegean, studying gestures, pauses, and the careful exchange of gifts. She wouldn't speak. She wouldn't need to, because this is where she learns what power really is. Not always loud, not always public, but deliberate, protected, and patiently built. On certain nights, the cities changed, the streets filled with oil lamp glow, the smell of roasting grain, and the pulse of drums that could be felt through the soles of your feet. Festival was more than celebration. It was a public memory, a city reminding itself who it was. For her, those nights were also instruction. She would watch how crowds moved, who stood closest to the sacred space, and which families were greeted first, because ceremony was never only spiritual. It was social order, performed. And then came the moment when she was no longer treated as a child. Not with a single announcement, but with a sequence of small, deliberate acts. Hair arranged differently, a new garment pinned at the shoulder, perfume oil pressed into the skin, elders speaking words meant only for her to carry. Soon after, her future would be set in motion. A noble marriage was a bridge built between households, and bridges are designed for strength, not for softness. She would step into a new home with new faces, new expectations, and a new name spoken in rooms where she had never stood before. History doesn't give us her voice, but we can imagine the shape of her days, learning the rhythms of another household, mastering its customs, and becoming fluent in what could be said aloud and what had to be implied. Because this is where influence begins. In the pause before a greeting, in the order food is served, in which door is opened and for whom. No throne, no battlefield, just a household run so precisely that power feels invisible, until you realize everything is moving exactly as she intends. Archaeology shows that some Philistine houses were built bigger and stronger than others. They weren't just places to sleep, they were places where work was organized. Inside an elite home, the day ran on routines. Food prepared, cloth finished, tools maintained, spaces kept ready for visitors. Someone had to keep those routines from breaking. Women could hold that responsibility, not as a title on a wall, but as oversight that kept the household functioning. And when guests arrived, every detail mattered. How quickly water was brought, whether the room felt calm, whether the service looked effortless. A meal could be a meeting without speeches. People watched. People remembered. This is not the kind of life that leaves a clear record, but it fits what large households require: coordination, discipline, and steady attention. In a world of swords and shields, her greatest weapon was intelligence. The Bible records repeated wars between the Philistines and the Israelite tribes, ancestors of today's Jewish people, conflicts that shaped the ancient Near East. Our written sources are limited, but the struggle for land and trade routes was constant. While men fought on the battlefield, noblewomen managed estates, resources, and alliances. We can imagine her keeping the army supplied, advising her family who to trust, and shaping outcomes without ever lifting a sword. Archaeology shows that Philistine temples were not only sacred spaces, but also places where wealth moved and was stored, through offerings, feasts, and controlled resources. Texts and patterns from the wider region suggest women could hold recognized roles in cult life, from ritual participation to managing temple-related work. So we can imagine her beneath firelit beams and plastered walls, part of a world of incense, offerings, and careful record-keeping, where devotion and economics were never fully separate. Not because we know her name, but because temples required administrators, and power always had to be managed by someone. In later years, a noblewoman often became a matriarch, guiding younger women, managing family lands, and preserving traditions. She protected inheritance, shaped marriages, and kept the household steady. We picture her as a quiet force of wisdom, having survived wars, intrigue, and political change, her influence woven into the fate of her city. We do not know her name. History did not write down her deeds, but archaeology shows women like her existed, wealthy, intelligent, and powerful. Their names are gone, their world is not. This story is a reconstruction built on real history to reveal the hidden lives of Philistine noblewomen. She never ruled from a throne, yet she shaped an empire from the shadows.